Thank you very much, Alice. It's a great pleasure to be here. My day job is leading the UK operations of Canonical, which is an organization that is really built to deliver services together with solutions around the extraordinary work that happens globally in the free software community to institutions, to both government and the private sector. So I'm absolutely delighted at the clear evidence of progress that's being discussed here in terms of people's awareness and understanding of the value that free software represents to the public and the private sector. I'm also really delighted at the insight that we're seeing in terms of the economic dynamic, both in terms of the ability to invest locally, build local capacity, keep wealth and build wealth in local economies while accelerating the evolution of a shared global platform, which is really what free software is, the digital commons that we can all build on. So that's my day job, but my dream job, which I spend about half my time on, has nothing to do with the public or the private sector, and everything to do with what real people choose to use in their own personal and private capacity. The software that gets used at home, the software that gets used on the road, the software that people use personally. And there are all sorts of very high-level economic arguments for enterprises to adopt free software. What fascinates me more, because I think it's a deeper, more profound challenge, is whether or not we can actually produce software using the full chaotic dynamic of the open source process that is beautiful, that is easy to use, that people who don't care about software and aren't doing economic analyses would themselves choose to use. And so that's a real focus for me. It's a real motivator for many of the people that I work with, both in the community and at Canonical. And so I'll be talking a little bit about three areas where I think we really could raise our game in the free software world to produce extraordinary software that is visibly powerful and delightful to use. So the first area that I think we could greatly improve what we do in the free software ecosystem is to embrace the idea of cadence. Now, cadence is all about a rhythm. We've seen a number of free software projects move to time-based releases. It was a very controversial idea when it started because historically people felt software was all about features. I think there's growing awareness of the fact that mentality comes from the proprietary software world where there's a real desire to sell the new version. And so it's all about the features, and releases are based on having enough features to make a compelling sales argument. Whereas in fact in the free software world it's all about collaboration, and it's all about innovation, and the pace of that innovation isn't directly controlled and shouldn't be associated with release schedules. There's growing recognition of the fact that releases in free software projects have value in and of themselves. They energize communities. Every time a software project makes a release, whole machineries, social machineries around that project are activated. Developers tend to be very focused on the process of development, and that actually happens at a constant pace all the time. People who are interested in coding tend to do that at a steady pace the whole time. But everybody else in the project, the people around the project, the advocates, the translators, the documentation guys, those guys are really energized by releases. So there's a growing recognition that if you want to have a healthy community that brings in more than just software development skills, then you want to have a really predictable and focused release cadence. There's a great deal of testing that happens when software projects make releases. Having a regular cadence, having a short cycle and a regular cadence really helps in the prioritization of the work that gets done in free software projects. When you have projects that don't make a release for 2 years or 3 years, it's very hard for folks to understand what's important, what's not important. It's very hard for folks to be confident that they are working on the things that are most important. When I see projects that adopt a regular cadence, a 3-month cycle, a 4-month cycle, a 6-month cycle, they tend to be working on things that are topical and focused at any given time, because each 3 months or 4 months or 6 months they're asking themselves, what's the most important stuff for us to get right in the next short period? Sometimes people say that that comes at the cost of deeper, longer, more challenging feature work or infrastructure work. But I don't think that's the case. And in fact, there are now many very significant projects like the kernel, which use short iterations, 3-month iterations, and yet have no problem delivering radical change in a 3-month cycle. They separate out the release cycle from the feature development cycle and organize themselves accordingly. There's also a great deal of publicity, of course, that goes with releases. So I'm a very strong fan of the idea of cadence-based software development. We're now starting to see some high-profile projects. I mentioned the kernel, GNOME, and KDE all starting to do this. It really is not an engineering challenge. It's a leadership challenge. We need to have leaders in free software who understand the value of embracing this kind of cadence. There are some tools that are emerging, like distributed version control systems, that make a big difference in this regard, because they, again, allow people to separate out the release management process from the feature development process and make sure that they're only landing features that are ready for the current release cycle at any given time. A big area of focus for me is going beyond the idea of individual projects and their cadence and looking at the whole software ecosystem. When you look at the free software environment, it's driven by, the real heart of it is communities that have particular focuses. The Apache community, the Apache Maven community are really interested in the art and science of Java-based build systems. The Tomcat community are really focused on the art and science of application serving. The Mozilla community, the Firefox community, really focused on the art and science of the web, and so on. Even the meta communities like Ubuntu are really focused, in our case, on the art and science of aggregation and integration, right? How you take lots of different components and bring them together. So what makes it powerful is that in each case, you have a natural selection of expertise and a natural selection of enthusiasm. Unfortunately, with all of those projects doing different things at different times, there can often be an effect where those projects work against each other. We're seeing this, for example, in the graphical subsystem at the moment, the X server at the moment, where as different parts of that community are focused on doing different things at different times, they're unable to sort of get together and publish a tested platform with specific where testing has been done across the entire stack, because different people are using different versions of different pieces of that stack at any given time. So I'm really trying to promote the idea of a cadence across the whole free software community. We're starting to see this now with more and more projects aligning with the GNOME release cycle. So we have GNOME and KDE roughly aligned on 6-month cycles, and the kernel on a 3-month cycle. I think what we want to do is go from the short-term cycles to look at macro cycles, like 2-year cycles, where all of those projects say, okay, every 2 years we want to make sure that we have at least one release which we consider a long-term stable release. That would enable the distributions then to get together and see if they can find more opportunities for collaboration between themselves on those long-term releases. I don't believe that distributions compete on the basis of specific versions, having the latest version or having a particular version of a particular piece. I think they compete on completely different things. Their core value set, the approach they take, some of the distro-specific technology. And I think the level of fragmentation, effectively, that we have between distributions is a great obstacle to raising both public acceptance and awareness and confidence in the free software platform and the general quality of that platform. So we are now starting to see a number of distributions embracing this idea. In Ubuntu, we have a 6-month cycle, which is our sort of short-term cadence. And as I say, there are a number of free software projects that are aligning on the 6-month short-term cadence. We've now embraced for our LTS, our long-term supported releases, a strict 2-year cadence on that. The decision to go for a 2-year cadence was challenging. We spoke to a lot of people in other distributions, in the software space, in the hardware space. Hardware vendors tend to want a much shorter cycle because they want newer versions of software to take advantage of newer versions of their hardware as often as possible. And people who focus on software deployments want a much longer cadence. They want a sort of 3-year cadence. And just about the only overlap between those two is a 2-year cycle. So to the extent that you're all involved with free software community, I would really encourage you to be supportive of the idea of short-term iterations on a time-based cycle, and then a longer cycle around that, so that the various distributions can effectively know when they're talking to a free software project how to align and collaborate most effectively with those projects. The second area that I think we could really sharpen our focus is that of quality. Now, quality is a point of pride in free software. We tend to tell ourselves that free software is inherently of a higher quality than proprietary software. But there are many things that we can learn, including learning from the proprietary software world, and there are many ways in which we can improve the story. One of the ways we can improve the story is by ensuring greater consistency across the platform. There have been attempts like the LSB to do that. I believe that a more rigorous focus on cadence is going to do that more naturally. Another way that we can improve quality is by focusing on and embracing formal quality practices. This is unpopular with developers, right? Because they feel that time is best spent doing development. For that reason, I think we actually need to encourage communities to support and bolster the work of quality-focused community members. There are people out there who love working on quality, rigorous quality programs, test programs, test plans, and so on are hugely valuable. Within Canonical, we do a lot of work both with the community and with corporates. And many of the guys who come from a deep free software background and who've been pulled into projects where they're delivering, for example, the netbook software on Toshiba's netbooks or Dell's netbooks, say they've been surprised at how valuable it is to have formal quality practices applied to their software with rigorous QA. Another practice that I think we could really encourage is the use of automated testing. And there are many different philosophies about how you do that. Some people, in the agile software world believe you should actually write the tests and then write the code to fulfill the tests. But regardless of how it's achieved, the important thing to me is that every project should have a deep set of automated tests that goes with it, so that people who use the software and new developers participating can absolutely know when they're having a negative impact on the quality of that code base. The Linux Foundation has led a very substantial effort over the last couple of years to build a set of test suites for free software, but unfortunately they've had very little traction in getting those test suites embraced by developers. And I think if we aren't able to achieve that, then that's a great loss. There's wonderful work that's been done that will rot unless it is actively embraced. I myself have seen on projects that I work with just the tremendous difference that it makes when you introduce rigorous automated testing. Amongst other things, it makes a great difference to the ability of new developers to start to participate in a project. There is often a great gulf between the developers who are considered core, who know each other, who trust each other, and new developers who would like to participate or who would like simply to make a small contribution. In many cases, those contributions don't get evaluated and don't get included because the quality mechanism depends on personal relationships and personal trust. I know that you know the code, and therefore I'll just land your patch without doing any sort of formal quality work on it, because that would take a lot of time. Automated tests really help to unblock that, because a patch can be applied, tests can be run, and you get a very quick sense of whether or not there is a potentially dangerous or unexpected consequences from that patch. In Canonical, we go to the extent that all the products that we produce, where we are effectively the upstream, all have automated test suites, and all have automated test suite runs before any changes are made to what we call the trunk branch. No human can land code on the trunk branch. You can only propose that code be landed, and then only after the test suites have been automatically run will that code actually land. Code review is another practice that, again, is not popular at all with developers when it's first discussed, but it's enormously energizing for communities because it gives the opportunity for real debate and discussion about code quality, about coding standards, about the strategy and direction of the project. even in small projects where you have a very strong lead, we've observed great benefits from having those projects embrace code review, having the lead, the owner of the project, ask newer members of the project to review his code or her code, simply because it's broadening the set of eyeballs that have insight and understanding into the code base. And there are a plethora of tools that are emerging to create the opportunities for real collaboration, in-person almost collaboration. We're seeing real-time shared editing environments where two people can edit the same document at the same time, the same text file, the same code at the same time, using EC2 or using newer software and protocols. We're seeing a much greater use of voice over IP, for example, between developers on opposite sides of the world to simulate pair programming, to simulate the ability to be effectively in the same room talking to one another. In projects which take quality seriously, we often see a commitment to stable maintenance. Again, something that's often not popular with free software hackers. They're really motivated to work on the latest version of technology, and they often don't see the value in publishing a stable branch and investing in that stable branch. We find that when projects adopt a cadence-based release mechanism, it's much easier for them to say, okay, we will have a stable version, and we will only make security, top crash, and data loss fixes there, because people know that they're going to get a new version. Any new features don't have to be backported to that stable version. It's much less work. It's much clearer for everybody else. It results in a higher quality product. So these are all practices that I think have been demonstrated to make a real difference in quality. If we want to be the platform, the de facto standard platform, a shared digital commons, then we must take quality seriously. Free software is not for hackers, right? If we really want to deliver on the promise of free software, it is not enough to be for us, by us. It must be by us, for everybody. And that means we must take quality seriously. Whenever I see code that's been written, that basically gets things to the point where a developer can use it, I think, well, that's only a small fraction of the goal. This is sort of selfish code. And when I see code that's been written so that anybody can use it, then I'm really impressed. Then I think we're starting to deliver what free software is all about. One of the best examples of this has been the work of a guy called Till Kumpeter. Not many folks know him, but he's the reason why more and more you can take a Linux box, any Linux box, connect it up to a printer, any printer, and it will just work. He has that real sort of vision of saying, I want anybody to have a great experience here. It's not about just me getting my printer to work. It's about me making it possible for any printer to work. And that's extraordinary work. And the last area where I think we need to make some fundamental changes is in the way we think about design. Historically, the free software community has been a celebration of software engineering excellence. People have been drawn to free software who are themselves passionate about software. And so we celebrate people who write software that's particularly efficient or particularly fast or particularly robust or particularly secure. We don't always celebrate people who write software that's really easy to use, or celebrate people who write software that is that is exciting to use, and very slick and very well presented. There are some things that are changing that. The success of Apple has really started to make people realize that it is possible to challenge a network effect monopoly like Microsoft's by doing something that is really genuinely better in the eyes of end users. That it's not simply our fate to sit around and complain about how unfair the world is that Microsoft has a monopoly. We can actually do something about that, and part of what that takes, if we want to do that, is to produce software that people are delighted and excited to use. Another big driver of this has been the fact that the web has really sharpened people's minds around user experience. If you build a website, you have about 15 seconds from when somebody lands on your website to when they leave if you haven't connected with them, given them a reason to stay, given them the satisfaction of actually achieving something with your website in that 15 seconds, then very often they will just move on. So the successful Web 2.0 sites are all sites that are very well designed, very easy to use, very compelling, draw you in, give you immediate satisfaction, gratification, the sense of you're actually achieving something, something that is meaningful to you. And those are all the sort of core principles of really good user experience-based software design. So free software hackers are in many cases, heavy users of that software, and they're seeing that it really pays off to do great design. Unfortunately, free software hackers themselves are not very good, as a rule, designers of software. And that's just something that it would be healthier for the free software community as a whole to acknowledge and admit. We need to make space at the top for people who are competent, who are brilliant at design. We need to invite them into our conversations. We need to respect their leadership. We need to be willing to do what they want, even when it might be more elegant to code it a different way. And that's a really radical shift in the way we organize communities and the way we lead communities. We need to think of the user first. It's amazing how pervasive that change needs to be. I often speak with brilliant kernel hackers who say, look, that design stuff is all very nice and everything, but I don't need to worry about that. I'm writing device drivers. The user's never going to touch device drivers. Why should I care about user experience? But it's extraordinary the extent to which decisions made in the kernel really will have a genuine impact on the experience that an end user has of the software. Often we pride ourselves in the Linux kernel, for example, by throwing out the old stuff and rewriting it with something new. And that's all very well because, it gets better. But it gets better over about 3 to 5 years, and during that time, half of the old stuff is still lying around. And the problem with that is that in many cases it becomes very, very difficult to deliver a high-level user experience which is consistent across all of the hardware that the Linux kernel supports, right? You'll all have had experiences where you'll want to connect up to a Wi-Fi network, and you have a very different experience depending on what particular hardware you have. That is dramatically compounded by the fact that for a long time we had multiple different stacks, multiple different sort of approaches to writing Wi-Fi drivers. And we had a whole ideological and engineering debate going on in the kernel community for a long time about which was better and how it should be and so on. In the meanwhile, users suffered, right? I'm not impressed by the idea that maybe sometime in 10 years we'll have a perfect Wi-Fi stack, right? If for the duration of that time, the result is that end users cannot have a predictable experience taking the laptop of their choice and connecting to the Wi-Fi network of their choice. We need to find a way to achieve that goal of evolution, achieve that goal of elegance without penalizing users along the way. There is a real tension between the amazing capacity that we have for innovation because there is no central control, right? The fact that any hacker can take a brilliant idea and run with it is a very powerful good in the free software movement. But it is in real tension in many cases with the desire to have something that is ultimately easy to use because fragmentation drives users away. And so we need to find effective ways of retaining the good of innovation, which is important, but also retaining the good of consistency and great user experience. The projects that have succeeded at this have been the ones that put design right out at the front. GNOME 2 was a great example at a time when very few other projects were interested in this. GNOME 2 was a great example of the powerful benefits of putting users first. I'm very concerned that GNOME is losing that relentless focus on users and becoming more of a technologist's playground. That's a serious concern, and as a result, we're at Canonical we're investing substantially more in user experience to make sure that Ubuntu's direction remains focused on the user. Moblin, which is a really interesting and I think very significant project being led by Intel, now hosted by the Linux Foundation, has very strongly embraced this idea. They have a very clear focus on design, a very well-defined style, and then they're making sure that everything they do is consistent with that vision. Now you can argue about whether or not the vision is the right one. That's far less important than making sure that everything that is delivered as part of Moblin is consistent with that vision. We should not allow projects to lose their sense of what the experience is that they intend to deliver. Now, within Canonical, we've set up a project called Ayatana. And this is because we realized that there was something of a gap, what I would describe, between applications. Many applications are well led. They have strong, passionate leaders who understand their domain, and in many cases where there are gaps in free software is the space between those applications. So that's where we're concentrating our efforts on making sure that it's possible to improve the awareness that one has of what's happening on your system around the particular task that you're focused on. You're busy browsing the web, but someone is IMing you on the side, or you're busy watching a movie and your battery status is changing. Those sort of peripheral vision items are an area where we're particularly interested because we think they have a big impact on user experience. The term Ayatana is a Buddhist term for your sphere of consciousness, and they like to talk about expanding your sphere of consciousness, being able to be aware of what's going on while still focused on something in particular. And so it's a good term for that. So those are the three areas that I think we can improve what we do. We are trying to move free software from a software engineering enthusiasts community to a software experience and delight of software experience community. And I would be delighted to work with anybody else who is passionate about that. Thank you very much.